Welcome back to the next installment of what seems to be a never-ending barrage of EDD videos. I hope you like this one. It's the beginning of Component 3. This assignment's called Prototype Plan and Documentation. Let's get into it. Introduction. Before you build a prototype, you'll need to identify your team's need for 3 general resources. The first one's knowledge, which can be gathered from experts as well as online and print sources. You've been talking to those experts, right? The other 2 resources are heavily dependent upon items available to you, materials, and then tools and equipment that you may be able to use. If these 3 things aren't available for you, in some way, in some fashion, you might find it necessary to go back to the drawing board and rethink what your design needs to be so that it fits your environment, your availability to access tools, or your access to certain materials. As it says here, you might have to alter your final plan or design based upon a constraint that's discovered during this stage, so be prepared for that. This assignment is expected to be completed concurrently with materials and fasteners, along with a variety of other Component 3 assignments. This assignment's due date is before its end date. By the due date, your team is expected to complete the work necessary to finish the listing of all materials, tools and equipment, and any of the knowledge you need to make this product. Let's talk about resources. You, of course, have your trusty engineering notebook and some device that's connected to the internet. You're going to have to utilize some supply catalogs, especially for materials. Do some digging, do some research. Find out what we mean by supply catalogs. Talk with me about it if you need to. I might can point you in a particular direction, but you know who else can? Experts, mentors, people that deal with this stuff on a daily basis, people you should be building business relationships with and collecting contact information for. It's a good place to start. Also, I'm not talking about just Amazon here. I'm talking about really going out and finding good deals as best you can for these materials. Procedure time. The very first part of this procedure is for you to create a document that's going to delineate the resources that you need to create your prototype. It should be electronic so that it can be updated as needed. You might choose to use something like a Google Doc, or you might choose to use something like Google Sheets. I would talk to an expert, see what the most common thing is that's used for something like this. In my mind, I go with something that's more table formatted, like a Google Sheet. And here's why. Because you have to create a table for each of these categories below: materials, tools and equipment, and the knowledge, those 3 resources. It's pretty self-explanatory. I think you should talk to some of those experts, some of those mentors, people who are familiar with this, about bills of material, or BOMs. You might also want to talk to them about tools and equipment. You might also want to talk to them about what needed knowledge means and how a table can be made for that. Some of my examples are provided down below. In each of the tables, the lists of things, those materials, tools and equipment, and resources, you need to do certain things. You need to be sure that you describe as specifically as you can what your plan is to acquire things such as the materials or the knowledge that's needed. You need to show specific time constraints, like how long would it take to be able to get a specific type of material, or what kind of lead time you might need to track down something that's a little more rare or hard to get, whether that's a material or a knowledge for how to use a piece of equipment, or someone who can use that piece of equipment for you and produce some sort of component, or maybe even your entire prototype with your designs. The rest of this assignment is about creating a bill of materials. Down below you'll see that there's a table. We'll get into that. Then there's creating a tools and equipment list. We'll get into that as well. And then to create a list of needed knowledge, and you see the example here. And this is basically it. This is what this assignment is about. It's generating these lists, these ideas. It means that you have to do the research necessary to figure this information out, and that's what some of the other assignments will help you with throughout Component 3. When you're creating your bill of materials, you need to be sure that you do 3 things. Identify the needed items, determine whether the items are unique to your particular project, and then once you've figured out what all the items are, you need to research the standard sizes, quantities, and cost of those different materials, and then determine what sizes your team needs. Probably also a good idea to determine the quantity that your team needs. When you're identifying the needed items, be sure that you're real specific about what that means. Example given. You need an electric motor, so you need to know beforehand the ratings of the motor that's needed for your application. You might ask, what does this motor need to move? This information will help you pick from a selection of available motors. The best way to get going on this is to, as a team, look at a list of all the parts your design solution requires. Then, still as a team, brainstorm a list of the materials that you need to build your solution. So part 2 of your bill of materials is that you need to determine how unique the material might be, or if it already exists. If it's unique, you're going to have to make it or have it made for you. Could come out of some raw material like wood or plastic, maybe metal. But if it doesn't exist, you're going to have to find someone that can make it, or you're going to have to make it yourself, whatever that might be. Now, if the product does already exist, then you probably just need to purchase it. You can try to get it donated. There might be a manufacturing company out there that wants to help you out, or some business that wants to help in some fashion. There might even be someone out there that already has one and is just willing to donate it to you. Note, obviously donation is preferred since your group has a limited budget, which is how much money you got. That's not true. You need to consider what it is that you need, and then we have to work towards finding finance for that. This is something that you're going to have to dig into. You're going to have to start separating your team up to work on these component 3 parts. You're going to have to find someone that can help in some way, either with providing some sort of finance or with providing you the materials that you need. Using your interpersonal communication skills, you might need to contact an engineer, sales representative, or supervisor from a company with the item you need. Keep it local if possible, and refer to the professional correspondence for tips on corresponding with potential donors. Side story, I had the Harris Teeter down on Horton and Guest Road donate hundreds of plastic grocery bags for me one year. I think I still have some of those in storage, and that was almost a decade ago. Companies in the area really do want to help. You just have to reach out to them and do it in a very professional way. Okay, so now that you have all of the items listed, you need to start doing that research of sizes, quantity, cost, so forth, which means you're probably going to need to really use that supply catalog or some sort of online resource to help you figure out what that is. You might need to have some drawings of these things at this point and have these items drawn to scale so that you can get a more accurate accounting of what the quantities are. But that's up to you. You got to figure it out. Very open-ended. You need to put all that information that you determine in the bill of materials. You can see an example of a bill of materials below. You might find that when you're doing virtual solutions, some of this gets worked out for you. It all depends on what type of CAD software you're using. For sure, something like Inventor can create a bill of materials for you, but you have to model each and every item. Based on your BOM, you need to determine all of the tools and equipment necessary to assemble the materials into your prototype. Below is a list of items you might want to consider. It is by no means a complete list. It's just some suggestions, things like hand tools, power tools, shop tools, specialized equipment, which may not be available at the school or to you, CNC mills and routers, CNC laser cutters, 3D printers, plastic injection molding machines might be something you can get your hands on or access to in some fashion. Okay, so once you have the tools and equipment listed, you then need to determine if they are actually available for you in your lab or in the space where you're working. Which means if we don't have access to them, you might need to find someone who can help you out with that. Identify a source from which you can obtain a tool or equipment, contact that source, document that conversation, make sure that you discuss with them what the arrangements are for you using that particular tool or having some form of access to it. Again, you have to be professional, so use that professional correspondence for tips on how to do this. And then, of course, note any of the important information for each of the tools and equipment that you have in the table. The example here is a sheet metal brake. Does not exist in our lab, and maybe Smith's Metal Working can help you out with that. You can see here, I put in the outside source notes. Can help, but must make an appointment with them. In the end, you need to create a list of needed knowledge. Consider the knowledge that your team needs and consider the fact that if they don't have it, you might not be able to meet a particular specification. So you might need to track down someone that can help you out with this. Think about what math, what science and engineering concepts you need to have as a knowledge base to move forward. Consider the skills and knowledge needed to be able to correctly and safely assemble your prototype using any of the tools that you have listed in the tables before, or to handle any of the materials that you have listed in your bill of materials. You need to list out what the concepts, the skills, or the information is that you need or that you have. Are you trained in using a 3D printer? Are you trained at using the mill? How proficient are those skills? Do you need further training with any of them or help with any of those things? What about woodshop tools? Do you have access to them, and do you have the knowledge necessary to utilize them? If someone in your team doesn't have that information or that knowledge locked in their head, you might need to identify a source that can provide some assistance with each of the items that you've listed. Contact the source for help and arrange some sort of transfer of knowledge. Be sure you're professional about it, and be sure you document that conversation. Below you see a table of how I've set this up. For example, you need an expert to review extension arm calculations. Do we have that outside assistance? Yes, we do. It's apparently Robert Grissom from USC. Outside source notes? We can email our notes and calculations to him for review. Wonderful. Reading time. As you determine the availability of resources for your team, reflect any changes to your design with notes in your E&B and any revisions to your final drawings. By the due date, your team needs to submit a document with their BOM, your tools and equipment list, and your needed knowledge list. Your team should already have a significant amount of this information collected, organized into E&Bs and in the various tables as described above. You should have this ready to share with me, your instructor, and then add it to your portfolio or technical report, and then to your CDR, your final design proposal, by the end date as described on the project planning timeline Excel sheet. Remember, the end date is a little bit further along than the actual due date. I want to see these tables and lists by the due date, and then have you finalize everything for them by the time you get to your CDR. In other words, you need to have the table set up, all of the items filled out, and then start showing me how you've begun the work needed to get your tables complete. This is part of component 3, element G. So 50 points for this assignment, and you need to upload some sort of file or website link. And this brings us to the end of project plan and documentation assignment. It's kind of a big assignment, and it encompasses some of the other assignments that you'll be doing within component 3. I hope you found this video helpful and somewhat enlightening. I can't wait to see what all of you come up with in the end. I hope you have a great night. See you next time.